Hello, good morning. Thanks for all being here. It's a lovely morning. and I'm not late. I think we're still within our time. Two curtains, yes. So excited. Well. So am I. I thank you all for being here. My name is Matthew Gaston. Raymond, Brian, Salty Boy, Science Guide. This is the first of a series of plant presentations we'll be doing. We'll do at least one a month, and if they're popular, we'll do more. Folks had requested the evolution of plants, which makes sense because this is the beginning of plants, and so we get to start at the beginning, which is an appropriate place. This is an exciting opportunity to discuss so many things. So you're here to learn. Well, it's great, Duskborn. You might learn a thing or two. If you're new here, hello, my name is Matthew, and I'll introduce myself. I'm from San Antonio, Texas. I grew up there and went to the botanical garden as a kid in third grade and got addicted to plants. And so the photo of me here is me as a little kid, and my parents got me a greenhouse for Christmas, and I was obsessed with it. And I would try and grow a bunch of different things. And in this one, you can see that there's a little cycad, and there's an aloe and a Mexican heather that's not doing well. My mom might be here watching, so don't say anything you wouldn't say in front of your parents. But then I was really interested in plants ever since I got hooked in third grade, and I wanted to see really big leaves. So I went to Georgia for the first time, and the Chattahoochee has giant trees with giant leaves. And this leaf is a fig leaf that was my carry-on item. I carried this on the plane. I pressed it in the newspaper and held it flat like that. And then I went to San Francisco. Well, I went to Berkeley to study plant biology and genetics. And I ended up being an intern at the San Francisco Botanical Garden. And here's a photo of me digging up a plant called manroot. Manroot is a cucurbit, so it's a cucumber. And it has a giant underground storage root that looks like a little person, like a little Pikmin with his little hands up. And it's mentioned in the Bible as called Mara, which is the genus of the plant. But that was really a fun experience. Got to do some hands-on horticultural stuff. But then I was actually terrified of public speaking. And so I was like, I'm going to force myself to do education because it's easy for me to talk about plants. So this will help me overcome any, paralyzing fear I have. And so then I ended up teaching in different schools in the Bay Area. The Bay Area, doing classes on ecology and biology. And then I went to Hawaii to study plants in Hawaii at the University of Hawaii Manoa. It was really fun. I was doing my PhD, and I found a teak leaf. So this teak leaf was massive, one of the biggest leaves I'd seen. I love a big leaf. And then I was like, you know what? I think I've had my fun. I'm going to leave. So I got a master's instead, went to the Zilker Botanical Garden and did education there. So I was the education director there. And now I do education all over the place, online and in person. And I actually have three core things that I value: education, entertainment, and evaluation. So I do online education and in-person education, helping folks understand the world around them, entertaining. So, having fun is the most important thing in life for me, in my opinion. And if you're having fun, then you're doing something right. And so, social media can be fun. Sometimes it's educational. Sometimes it's a mix of things. And then evaluation, I have a consulting company where I provide homeowners, individuals, companies, and organizations advice, consultation, and evaluation on their plants and their landscapes for whatever purpose they have. So that's a little bit about me. Tiffany Morgan, you're excited to hear about alternation of generations. Well, here we go. So the learning objectives. I have my camera on the screen here. It might eclipse a few things, but not too much. I can also alter it slightly. So today, by the end of this, you should be able to identify potentially various definitions of what a plant is. You should be able to identify significant plant adaptations throughout geologic periods. And then, critically, you should be able to recall the geologic period in which the Fagaceae appear, which is one of our most beloved families, the beech family. As you know, it includes oaks, and oaks are delightful plants with acorns. And then I have a few disclaimers. So, nota bene is a note well, or make a good note of this. This is my distilled version of the evolution of plants. This is a shortened, condensed version of all green plant life on Earth. There will be Q&A, so you can ask questions in the chat during the presentation, and at the end, we will have time at the end. I'm doing really well. I had to set an alarm to wake up. It's a little bit early for me, so I'm excited. So this will be a fun time. This is my distilled version, talking about things that are fun for me in ways that are engaging for general audiences that might not have a plant background. Yeah. So some things are kind of debated. Not people don't necessarily agree on everything, especially when you look at evolution of plants, because there's a fossil record, and when you have just fossils of plants, you don't get all the details. So I'm presenting the things that are the most agreed upon. Interestingly, well, I spent, I don't know, about 15 hours ensuring that the presentation was up to date. And I learned that the things had changed since I first made this 3 years ago. This is a presentation I used to give at the Botanical Garden. And we've learned so much. And so I've read a lot of things in the past week and updated the presentation so it's congruent with the current scientific understandings. And new things arrive every day. New things arrive every day. And new discoveries. So, you know, in a year, I'm going to have to update this presentation. Taxonomy is wild. She's fluid. We love her. She's great. We love how things change. Science is knowledge, and knowledge is things that we learn, and we learn more when we do more. So yeah, plural guy. You can ask questions throughout. There's like a 15-second delay, so I'll see it in the chat. And then you can also, at the end, we'll have a Q&A. So this is like plant spark notes. So this is to whet your appetite. And if you really like it, then you can dive into paleobotany. So let's begin at the beginning of the universe. Yeah, it's a good place to begin, actually. So let's actually talk about the whole history of the universe, but only the good stuff. Only the stuff that I'm interested in. So, this is the history of the universe, but only the good stuff. Yeah, we're going to whet your appetite. So this is time, and we'll say it's a timeline. Some people say it's cyclical, but for now we'll think of it as a line. And, you know, this is the beginning of time. The universe began 13.8 billion years ago. Quite a while. Very, very quickly after, galaxies formed. The different star matter condensed in on itself. And within a very short period the galaxies emerged. But then we had to fast forward many billion years. Earth formed 4.5 billion years ago. And it was another 0.5 billion years when we had the first replicating molecules. Some people might consider that life because they're replicating. But generally, the consensus is that life began 3.7 billion years ago. And they would be really simple organisms, small things repeating, with repeating replicating molecules. Now, the thing that I care most about is called land plants. Let's see, my face is in the way. Can we move my face? The first land plants emerged 470 million years ago. And then, for reference, the great apes, which we are only 20 million years ago. And this timeline's to scale. It took a while to draw this to scale, but you can see that this period of time is crazy. how it shifted. And when we think about plant evolution, we think of things called geologic periods. And I've created this color coordinated system for each of the periods. And we will be able to look at each of these periods. There's no lateness. I skipped the Embo. I skipped some things. This is a distilled version. Um, so, oh, sometimes time is cyclical. The universe begins 13.8 billion years ago. Galaxies form 13.8 billion years ago, very quickly afterwards. Then the Earth forms, and then we have the first replicating molecules. Life begins 3.7 billion years ago. And every time you say billion, you have to say it like Carl Sagan. The first land plants, which are my favorite thing, are 470 million years ago. And then for reference, the great apes appeared 20 million years ago. Saturday morning kid shows. You're like a kid again. There you go. get your Cheerios. So we often think about things in geologic time. And so geologic time has a whole scale of things, but I've created this color system, and we're going to look at the evolution of plants through these particular periods, geologic periods. And here we are. So this is called geologic time. This image is to scale. My face is perpetually going to be in the way. I do want my face included. There. And so we often think about time in millions of years. So if we look on the far right, that's us. Invented colors. I just like these colors because they're bright and vibrant. The 0, that's 0 million years ago, 50 million years ago, and so forth, all the way back to 542 million years ago. So there we are. There's the Cambrian, the Ordovician, Silurian, Devonian, Carboniferous, Permian, and then you might know Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous, because that's when the dinosaurs were around. Somehow tied to dinosaurs, Lamp Frost, you're connecting the dots. Things that we know as dinosaurs lived during Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous. And then there's a Paleogene and the Neogene. Now, when we look at geologic time, there's a big category. We're going to close my face for now so that we can see the things. The big category here is the Eon. Yeah, the world is so old. We should celebrate her birthday. So, here we are. There's the big category called the Eon, and then we have the categories underneath called the Era. Within the eras are periods, and the periods are the things that I tend to be interested in, and that's what I think most people will refer to. But then you have these things called epochs, or if you're British, you say epoch. I think I've always pronounced it epoch until I was trying to see how Americans said it. And then within the epochs, there's the ages. Period, that's right. So for example, this particular eon here has the era called the Mesozoic, and within the Mesozoic, there's the Cretaceous period. And the Cretaceous period has two epochs, the early Cretaceous and late Cretaceous. Now, when they were naming these, the late Cretaceous is sometimes called the upper Cretaceous because when you look at time, you know, if you have layers of sediment and you're digging down, you'll hit the sooner stuff before you hit the older stuff. So the late Cretaceous is on top when you're digging up fossils. And the when you dig up the fossils, they're on the top. So sometimes it's called the upper Cretaceous and the lower Cretaceous. So if it's early, it's lower. And then we won't be using this particular terminology, but just for awareness, there is another category called age. So you could be in the Albian Age, which is in the, you know, early Cretaceous period. And so these are just ways of thinking about time. Mitchell, that's a great question. We'll get there. There's some exciting points. When I was reviewing this presentation, I was like, wow, there's a whole like 3 periods where I don't have anything to note. I was like, what is going on? I spent several hours making sure I didn't miss anything, and I was right. There was nothing interesting happening in like 3 periods. But then some of them have so much stuff. It's great. Okay, so when we look at the geologic timescale, there's actually an interesting thing that occurs. Death, lots of death. This is mass extinction. So these timescales are created and constructed by man to describe what has occurred in the history of time. And it's convenient to use distinct events in history, like extinctions, to be the boundaries. So there's a boundary between O and S is Ordovician and Silurian, and yeah, it's Leviosa. The Ordovician and the Silurian have a major extinction between them, and the Devonian and the Carboniferous have a major extinction. There's other events that might have occurred, but these are easy tells for big change. So, Lame Kai, that's a great question. Your question was, let's see. Your question was, does not much stuff happen in the period just because we don't know, or not much stuff happened? So that's a good question. It could be both. We might not know, but from what we do know, there's more exciting things happening in terms of plant evolution and development. Also, thank you for following, Troy, and subscribing. Okay, let's begin with the Cambrian. We love the Cambrian period. I'm going to keep moving this little face thing. Okay, so this is our first period as we travel through time. There's no plants in the Cambrian. Next, skip. But there were things that were photosynthetic. So we have these cyanobacteria. There's cyanobacteria, which are green, but they're not plants. And then there's these things. Well, by golly, these look like plants. But I wouldn't call them plants. They're actually a type of algae. People call it, this common name is stoneworts, but they're in a group called the Charalis or Charalis. And they recently discovered in 2022 that this thing called the stonewort is the closest living relative to plants. Now, what is a plant actually? That's a good question, I think, to begin with. If you were Aristotle, you would say, well, does it have a sensitive soul? Is it have emotions and seems sensitive? Then it's an animal. If it isn't, vegetable, aka plant. So that was the easy distinction. If it has a sensitive soul, animal. Everything else was plant. So there's 4 perspectives. There's 4 perspectives that we can look at. Begin. The first one is they have Latin names for them. Plantae sensu amplo, which is the definition Aristotle had, which is anything that has a vegetable soul. So land plants, red algae, green algae, fungi, bacteria. This is what Linnaeus adopted. Linnaeus's face appeared, but my face is in the way. Then we have the plantae sensu lato, which is a broad definition of plants. So this first one is like, let's include everything. The second one is, it's a broad definition of what a plant is. So land plants, all the little green things on land, red algae and green algae. Then you have the strict definition of plants, which is land plants and green algae. And then the final one is called plantae sensu strictissimo, which is the strictest definition of plants. That's all the land plants. You love brown algae. Well, there you go. Brown algae. So algae is a fascinating thing. And when we ask scientists about, what is a plant and who should be included in plants, well, we know that this one is completely obsolete. We know that the first definition that Aristotle used is obsolete and not necessarily going to be functional, because we have genetic data informing us that these are very different. Bacteria, fungi, and all these other plant photosynthetic things are very different. So then we have 3 other definitions. And are they reasonable? I personally utilize the definition of just land plants. And so they have particular cladistic names. This group here that includes the red algae are called the Archaeplastida. Now, the thing that defines this group is that it includes organisms that have phycobilins, which are a type of pigment that green algae and land plants don't have. So this would be a big group that encompasses a lot of things, and some of the plastids, which are like your chloroplasts, so the things inside the cells that can collect the energy from the sun, they have 4 layers of membranes. That's part of what some of the red algae have, and some of the other things in them, glaucophytes. Viridae Plantae is the green plants, which includes green algae. And so green algae is often considered a plant. But the thing about green algae is that, well, actually the thing about land plants is that land plants, if you look at the branching tree of everything, land plants are a single branch within algae. So in terms of cladistics and phylogeny and the evolution of things, it would make sense to kind of include green algae into this category of plants. In 2005, some folks had proposed a different name from Viridae Plantae, which means green plants, to Chloroplastida, which means like green or like colorful plastids, which would mean the kind of things that are green in general. And they have a lot in common. And the one that I personally like is the Embryophyta, which is to say, when we talk about plants, we're talking about land plants, and only those that are on land that have, 2 membranes in their plastids and chlorophyll A and B, and they don't have phycobilins, and they have a cell wall, that kind of thing. So if you talk about plants, generally, when people say land plants, or plants in general, they'll be talking just land plants. Technically, I think it would make sense to include all of these, like evolutionarily, because then you have these weird polyphyletic clades. So at the end of the day, I'm going to just say land plants are plants in this discussion, but there's a lot to it. Okay, land plants. I love land plants. Yeah. So there's 2 types of land plants. There's vascular land plants and non-vascular land plants. The non-vascular ones look like this. So we have things over here that are moss, lovely little moss. We have liverworts and hornworts. Now these are little tiny things, little tiny plants that don't have any piping to transport water or nutrients. And these are called non-vascular. So we talk about people at the gymnasium who are vascular because they have, their veins popping out. These plants have no veins of, xylem and phloem to transport water and nutrients, so everything has to diffuse across the leaf. So if you look at that moss, the leaves are really thin and really tiny because the water simply has to diffuse across them. And these are always small and kind of flat, and they're not a ton of cells thick. Class is in session, that's right. These things sticking up are the reproductive structures. Abnormal, yes. We're going to see the heart-shaped prothallus later. So these plants have reproductive structures. These are sporangia. They emit spores. So all of these make things called spores. That's how they make mores. But and then this is the liverwort, and we'll talk about those. But on the other side, there's the vascular plants. The vascular plants have piping to transport water and nutrients, and we can generally categorize them into 3 groups. The first one are the spore-bearing plants, called fern and fern allies. It's just a useful term. There's many things in this group that we'll talk about today. But you can see on the underside of this leaf, so this is the top of the fern leaf, and on the left is the bottom of the fern leaf. The bottom of the fern leaf has all these little bumps. They look like bugs, but those are actually the reproductive structures called sori. Each of them is called a sorus, and in the sorus, they have these little things that stick out called sporangia. And the sporangia open up and the spores come out. And a spore is a single cell. And we'll get there and talk about that. But there's also things called cone-bearing plants, or gymnosperms. Gymno means naked. and sperma means seed. So these are the nekid seed plants. So they have structures where the seed sits on a modified leaf, and it's not encapsulated in anything. Gymno means naked, so the gymnasium is the place of naked people. Now, I think it's very interesting how naked. You like the way I say naked? The gymnasium is a place of naked people, but we have gym clothes, which is inherently a paradoxical statement because you can't have clothes for a naked place. So that's the evolution of language. Very fun. And then you have the fruit bearing. My face. We have the fruit bearing plants called angiosperms. And if they make flowers, then they're going to make fruits. This is a nice tropical orchid tree of the genus Bauhinia. But the angio means encapsulated. They're encapsulated seeds and they're encapsulated in fruits. Isn't that great? Yeah, primeval trees. Well, we'll get there. So these are the vascular plants. And they have piping to transport water and nutrients. So the thing about them is that they can get really tall because they can move water up so that they can, get and the nutrients down sometimes to the roots. Okay, so now back to the Cambrian. There's no land plants in the Cambrian, but if you use the definition of verde plante, or green plants, then these are technically plants. The stoneworts. They're a really interesting group. They're called stonewort because they collect silica in their tissues. And I've seen plenty of these at the garden that I worked at. And if you rub them, they're rough. Silica is a hard mineral. Grass, if you eat, if you get grass and scrunch it, it feels kind of rough. And that's because it has silica. So these are the stoneworts. They're aquatic. They live entirely in water. And their form works perfectly for being in water. But if you take this thing out of the water, it immediately desiccates. Yeah, immediately desiccates. And it becomes a little shrivelly mess. So it lives in shallow shores and was recently reclassified into it. Oh, got you out of bed. There you go, Mitchell. Lovely. So now we're on to the next section, which is the Ordovician. Okay, this is the good stuff. Yeah. First land plants, baby. Very good. We love to see it. This is the beginning of the important stuff. And the most important little land plant is our friend Marchantia. This is the liverwort that we saw. Wort is an Old English word for plant. W-O-R-T. So hornwort, liverwort, stonewort. It's just a plant. The world was a better place back then. There were barely plants. Science guide, I don't know about that. But we got the first land plants. And these things were weird as hell. But they had this structure called the thallus, which is this flat green tissue. Now it's non-vascular, so it doesn't have any piping to move water. So it needs to be able to diffuse water across its cells. And it has some very interesting reproductive structures. It can reproduce in 2 ways. Well, 3 actually. So these structures spread out and they bifurcate periodically. And once they bifurcate, if you cut it, then it'll keep growing. Hydrothalloids. Yeah, well, not exactly sure. But these are the liverworts. So they're non-vascular plants that are spore-bearing, and they're some of the first land plants. So they have interesting structures. They have a thing called a gemma cup. So if you look over here on the right, there's these little things that look like they're full of little green discs. These are cups that appear, called gemma cups, and inside of them are inside the gemma cups are little blobs of cells that can be splashed by raindrops and then grow into new Marchantia. The interesting thing that I was reading when I was making sure I got all the facts right was that these little cups are analogous to the axillary buds of flowering plants. So everywhere a cup appears, it's functionally a little meristem, and it's creating little blobs of cells that can become new plant material. So, yeah, they're asexual reproduction. So this is a clone. So they don't need sex to reproduce. Black Lord Emmanuel, great question. It doesn't distract me. I encourage questions, so feel free to ask questions. We will get to the point where we talk about insect and plants. So right now, there's not really any notable insects in the Ordovician, but the first land plants were these little flat green liverworts. And so there's the little cups over there with the gemma. Here's a better photo. These little discs can get hit by the rain and then fall out and grow. That's wild, isn't it? They look scale-like, you know. There's a lot of special terminology for this thing. Now these are reproductive structures. That's how they took over the world. That's right, with those gemma. These are called the archegonia. So this is the female. So they are either male or female, or, you know, plus or minus. You know, we're assigning identities to them. They look like little palm trees, but they're not. These plants are tiny, and these archegonial heads might be 1 inch maximum. And so I have taken this image because this is the best image I've ever seen to describe this. Now, there's either the male over here or the female plant, and they have these little cups that can produce asexually, but then periodically they'll make these reproductive structures. On the female side, on the left here, yeah, they have the archegonia, and the archegonia receives sperm, and they had flagellated sperm, I believe, and on the right is male. And so this male plant makes all these little packets, and when it gets wet, they'll get splashed, and I believe they're flagellated, so the sperm can actually swim. And on the top, you see what's going on. So the sperm swims up to fertilize the egg, creates an embryo, and then it makes spores. So these reproduce by spore. Yeah, crazy stuff. Then we had a major extinction. Everything had a hard time. But then we enter the next period, the Silurian. Says some of the plants did cause an extinction because of they made it so cold. So the Silurian, it's hard to get photos because you're relying on people's understandings of what the time looked like, and when people were actually observing, you know, what people observed and what evidence has been recorded. So this is what I think a decent representation of this period would look like. So in the Silurian, we had plants that started to get a little bit bigger, and they looked like these two. They were called rhiniophytes and lycophytes. Now, lycophytes, that's a term you might know. We have lycophytes that live today, and they certainly grow. One of the things that's distinct about the rhiniophytes is that look at the way they branch. They go up and they split in two. That's called dichotomous branching. So a lot of these things, these particular things are dead. And they're extinct. They're completely gone. This is Cooksonia. That's the name we gave it when we found the fossil. And then Bororogwanthia. They look tubular. They do. So there's a reproductive ends on the end here. And they think they are indeed tubular, Mr. Perez. You're new to rhiniophytes. So they're all dead. But this is how we know about them. So, Mitchell, the reason why I enjoy the Silurian and Devonian and the earlier periods is that there's some crazy plants I've never heard of before. But we have them in fossils. So we have really good representations of their branching patterns here. And then look at this one. So this is the genus. This is that fossil, and you can see the leaf material is preserved quite well. And so when we get fossils, we can try and connect as many dots. And if you get a whole plant, it's easier to figure out what it is. So all of these, yeah, life was very weird. But some of the things, we still kind of have relatives of them. So the thing, though, about the rhiniophytes is that they're extinct. They're all gone, no more, goodbye. but they were vascular. So they had the ability to move water up and up and up. So they didn't have to stay flat like those liverworts did in the moss. They made spores. So they had reproductive spore-bearing structures in the very top. They had similar spore life cycles. And there's some type of primitive, like, underground root stem here. Yeah, they're very tiny. These are not big. Very, very good point. They're vascular indeed. And then lycophytes. So, lycophytes is a group of plants that evolved during this. This is the Silurian, right? The Silurian. And we still have them today, so we call them extant. Now, the ones that were alive at that time, not necessarily alive, but there are the living relatives. So they were vascular, so they could get pretty big. They had some primitive vasculature, and they made spores. We don't have seeds yet. Everything reproduces by spore. And just for clarification, extant means it's not extinct. So they're still alive, some of these lycophytes. It's a big group of plants. But look at this one. This thing is, it looks prehistoric because it is. So also during this period, we had the first things that we believe are ferns. Now, this is a photo of a bracken fern, which is a modern day fern, and this one was not alive, at that time period. But this group as a whole is Polypodiopsida. And so these plants are ancient lycopods and ferns, or lycophytes as we might call them, and ferns are quite old. But the thing is that the ferns of this time looked very different, and it's not until very recently do we get the modern fern families. So we've been talking about spores a lot. What's going on with spores? So a spore is usually a single cell. It's one cell, and it's a reproductive unit that gives rise to a new plant without sexual fission. So the plant makes a little spore, and the little thing that grows from the spore is what has the sex. So this is our leaf again. This particular plant is called kupu kupu, which is a Hawaiian fern. And the underside of the leaf has the sori. The sori, some of them look different, but this one has a little cover called an indusium, and underneath there's underneath there's these little things called sporangia that burst open and spores come out. A spore is a single cell, so it's really small. But then that spore grows into a little thing called the gametophyte, and it has a structure that's called a prothallus. It's heart-shaped. So if you look at it, it's shaped like a little heart. In the middle of it, there is the female reproductive part up near the top, and then further down is the male reproductive part. And the male reproductive part is a sperm that's flagellated. So the sperm can swim and potentially self-fertilize itself, and when it self-fertilizes, it grows a new leaf of this next generation of plants that bear spores, so they're called them sporophytes, but we call it a gametophyte because it makes gametes, and gametes are the sperm and egg. But all you need to know is that the cycle continues. And so this plant makes spores. Spores become this little tiny heart-shaped thing that are really thin, and you got to stay wet and moist. And if it's wet and moist, then the sperm will swim and fertilize the egg and continue the cycle. Cute. Cute, cute, cute. Easy, easy, easy. Now I move to the Devonian. The Devonian is crazy. Look at this. Look at all the things on this illustration. I see things that look like lycophytes coming from the ground. I see things that look like trees. Look at these trees. This is the time where we have the first trees. We had actually tons of things happen in this particular. Yeah, Demi Lovato is named after the Devonian. That's correct. That's canon. So many things, so many things happened. It's crazy. This is like 400 million years ago. So there was a development of specialized cells to conduct water. So there was vasculature, right? So there was piping to move water and nutrients around the plant. But during this period of time, The cells became more specialized. So they could do it a little bit better, so things could get bigger. There's things on the plant and on the leaves called stomata, which are usually like two cells that shrink and swell, and those two cells are tied together at the end, and so they can like open and close. And this picture is crazy. It's a little mouth. That's a little mouth, but there's a bunch of them on the underside of the leaf, and they're like only a cell big. And so these little tiny mouths allow for air exchange. And because they develop significantly, you could have better exchange of air. And so your plant could be bigger. And then there were new branching patterns that developed, and the first true trees. So this is when things got big. Yeah. We get big plant reveal. So that we have the first development of like what we might consider wood. This is there's two different plants here, but this first section A is called a transverse section, where you get the stem and you cut it. This is a fossil, of course, but you can see that there's wood that's forming, and then there's ray elements which move outwards. Yeah, then there's the development of like a primitive secondary growth. Then our beloved rhinophytes. We have some new forms of rhinophytes. There's this one here, Cyadophyton. It's always fun to see what people create with the images. And the branching on this one is pretty wild. You can see it's still spore-bearing, so it still has these spore reproductive structures on top. But this was one of the more interesting branching patterns. When we look at complex branching, we have this one plant called the Xylophyton. The fossil record indicates that this one was one of the first plants known to exhibit complex branching. So, as the plants got bigger, they ended up branching more interestingly, as opposed to just dichotomously, two at a time. We might have multiple branches. Our beloved lycophytes. Remember we saw the lycophytes earlier? And we still have them today? Well, this one is extinct, but it looks a lot like ones we have today. This is Asteroxylon, and I liked this image because it showed these rhizoids, which are like primitive roots. So, you know, we had development of like wood and trees and branching, but there's still these other plants that are existing. Everything is still making spores, and these little things would creep along the floor. And you can still see that they have this branching. The roots have a little bit more developed. My PowerPoint looks cooler than the college professors. Well, thank you. Now this is where we start getting into the good stuff. Someone had asked, I think it was a Mitchell. You said, when do the conifers begin? Well, this is not a conifer. This is a thing that looks like a conifer, but it's not. And the name itself even indicates that people thought that they were the thing that happened before gymnosperms. These are called progymnosperms. And this looks like Araucaria. It looks like a gymnosperm. It looks like a tropical conifer that we have today, like the monkey puzzle tree or something. But it produces spore, and it's almost more like a fern-looking thing. Yeah, progymnosperms. And so this plant, they gave the name Archaeopteris. Mr. Perez, you had a good question about what is the evolutionary need for branching? Is it more efficient? So if you're in a landscape and you're constantly surrounded by other things, your goal is to get as big as you can, and your end goal is to reproduce as much as possible to make your genetics live on. And so, if you can get tall, then you can outcompete the things around you, maybe cover them so you can get light. So that what they need is nutrients and water and light. So if you can get tall, then you can outcompete the things around you. If you make branches, and it is very efficient. If you look at fractals, plants follow the natural laws of the universe, and optimal efficiency is by creating fractals of oneself. And so this tree is becoming fractalized. Everything's about competition. Yeah. So in like evolutionary science, there's some questions that are harder to answer, but why things occur is usually because it is productive, reproductive. It is beneficial for progeny to be successful, or it's beneficial for reproduction. Yeah, fractals. So these plants have, through some random mutation and competition, the ones that were able to get tall and branch survived. This is not related to the dinosaur Archaeopteryx, but this is Archaeopteryx. Pteris uh, is the key ending difference here. Yeah, it has fractals of oneself, exactly. So it's not a fern actually. It's currently believed to be distinctly different from ferns, but it looks like a fern tree. Yeah. So yeah, natural selection. Okay. Now this is gonna make you think that it's a fern. Let me hide my face again. Let me move them. So the thing about this is that this plant is Terra xyloteris. It looks like it has fronds like a fern. This is a progymnosperm. Crazy looking thing. I love this section of time because nothing looks like this anymore. And it makes spores. Yeah, if you look up a modern fern, a modern fern tree would look pretty similar. The only difference is that this would have its leaves persisting. Okay, now we're on to the first seed plants. We have a new family. We have a new family. Um, Morg Magica had a question. Don't they share and spread each other's sperm by the end, or they can only be one? The only one sperm can fertilize the egg. Yeah. And then certain things are incompatible. But this is the first seed plant, we believe. Um, it's called Elxinia. And this is obviously a computer rendering, but it's in this family, the Moresnetaceae. And these are called seed ferns. So they were originally believed to be like, oh, these are like cycads. But people settled on the term seed fern because they seem to be kind of like ferns in a lot of their vasculature and development, but they make seeds. And most of the ferns we know about make spores. So what's going on? So this is a whole new group of plants called seed ferns. And in this picture, this is the reproductive end. There are these little tissues. It's a seed fern, yeah. Strange plant. There's little tissues that hold up a seed, and the seed develops inside of this little cup, and then it would come out here. So, just for reference, there are actually lots of things that we know today that make seeds. So we're going fast forward to talk about all the seed plants that currently or ever have existed. Seed ferns, the very first plants to make seeds, they're extinct, but the rest are extant, meaning they're still alive. So gymnosperms are still alive, and they're conifers, so like pine trees, cycads, which we'll talk about, ginkgos, the Nitae, and then all the flowering plants, the angiosperms. So the angiosperms make flowers. This picture here is a Netum. This is a gymnosperm that has a strobilus, I suppose is what you call it. Reproductive structure. Yeah. So these are all the things we know that make flowers. Then there was a big extinction. Major extinction. I'm going to get some water real quick. Major extinction time. It happens 5 times. So, we have to expect it. Yeah. We love the Megastrobilus. Who died? Gymno is Latin. I think it might be Greek. I don't know if it's Latin or Greek. Major extinction. Someone's extinct. But now, we enter the Carboniferous period. What a time to be alive. What a time to live. The Devonian and the Carboniferous were great for plants. Look at this illustration. We have, these things look crazy. This looks like a Tillandsia. Look at that. That looks just like a Tillandsia. The tree, it branches just like that. So, big diversification of the lycophytes. We had development of horsetails. We had ferns starting to take off. And then we had things called medulosins. Medulosins are wild. They're seed ferns. And then we had conifers. So the first conifers arose during this period too. So the Devonian and the Carboniferous, a big time plant development, exciting, very good. Horsetails. You've probably seen something that looks like this on the right. This thing is actually called the Calamites. And Mitchell was identifying earlier that there were trees that looked like horsetail. Well, this is the one. This is Calamites is related to the horsetail we have today. It was giant and it had a big underground stem and it shot up a hollow stem and then had these whorls and they collected silica. So they were kind of rough to the touch. So this is modern day horsetail or equisetum. And so what's interesting is that, oh, thank you everyone for subscribing. What's interesting is that we have good fossils of these things. So if you know Fossil Daddy has sent me some cool fossils over time. And one of them he sent me is this, it is a Calamites stem, and then there's a fern called Oligocarpa. These are from the late Carboniferous period. So if you look right here, this is the stem of Calamites, which is that giant tree. Now they were hollow. And so the sediment might have filled inside and it helps with the fossil production. But this one was collected by Fossil Daddy in Illinois. Over here is a really good fossil of a fern called Oligocarpa. But this is, one of the things about when you're collecting plant material, so it's really hard to see this. But if you look on the end right here, oh, so yeah, Fossil Daddy, there you go. Well, hey, okay, hype train. Very exciting. There's music that comes with this too. We do. So he is lovely. You should go check him out. But he has sent me some really cool things. And so this is the Calamites stem. Oh, okay. Thank you, Marcus. So I just wanted to share that. The giant Yoshi. Okay. Well, let me take a drink and we'll get back to horsetails. Science Guide. We deactivated all the oat redemptions because I'm trying to talk about plants right now. The shrimp pin, yeah, it's very cute. So, additionally, we have Selaginella. Selaginella is a lycophyte, and during the Carboniferous period, this genus arose. So this genus, we have this genus in the fossil record, but this plant's still live today. This is a photo from a couple years ago. This is it's crazy, and it has a quite primitive looking branching pattern, but it's vascular, so it can get decently big, and they tend to be flat. They have two types of leaves, but I love Selaginella. It's hard to grow. It needs some good moisture. It'll desiccate if you don't. Okay, now it's time to talk about this crazy group. These are all extinct now. These are all extinct. These are called medulosins, and I've titled it Medulosa, is what I was reading, and they use that word. But they're extinct. So they're a type of seed fern, and so they reproduce by seed. And one of the things that is like a fun shock and awe fact that people use about them is they had giant seeds the size of eggs. As a kid, if you read a plant book on evolution of plants, that'll be the fun fact that they give you. But they are proposed to have been one of the earliest plants to have had insect pollinators. That's what we seem to have found. Additionally, they had a very strange stem structure. um, the University of Berkeley has a good series of images and resources on them, and I've put them here. And one of the things that they identified is that the vascular bundles are kind of strange in that they have these large leaf bases. Now, it looks kind of like a fern tree. It's a seed fern, right? Looks kind of like a palm tree almost. But you can see that as people have found things, we give them names. And so if you find like a piece of the fossil that's like the medullosa, the stem, then they've given it that name. And then if they find the leaf tissue here, they've given it this other name, Neuropteris or Allelopteris, Althopteris. And then if you find this little junction here, it's been given the name Myloxylon. So it could be feasible that the fossils of these things are their own genera. It could also be feasible that these are all one plant. And folks at the University of California believe that the fossils that people have been calling Neuropteris are actually just the leaves of a seed fern called Medullosa, or in this group. And they have different illustrations depicting the different potential fossils in the connection. One of the hypotheses that they found is that there's two different leaf morphologies, one for full sun and one for shade. So the leaves that are more exposed to sun tend to have a certain morphology, and the ones in the shade tend to have a different shape. So maybe, this one is the full sun morphology and this is the shade morphology. They made seeds. So here is the seed, a predicted model of what the seed could have looked like using fossils. And fun connection. Phenotypic plasticity, yeah, exactly. Fun connection. Fossil Daddy also sent me a fossil of Neuropteris. So this is either its own genus of fern, or some people believe that these are the leaves of a medullosa. And so this is a really cool one. And you got to get that right angle to see it. But yeah, and these, he told me they're from the late Carboniferous. And, so this all makes sense. Yeah. I've been chatting for a long time. Look at but what a fascinating group of plants. It's completely gone now. Conifers. We had the first conifers arise during the Carboniferous period. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Fossil Daddy, for the fossils. The current belief of the oldest fossil, the oldest fossil we have for a conifer is called Chordates. And it had these kind of strap-looking leaves. And one of the things that's interesting about it is they found its fossils with muscles in between the root, the fossilized root. So it is believed to have lived in wetlands. So this is a cone-bearing conifer. It's a gymnosperm that lived in wetlands, but also could be in dry areas too. We're finally getting towards Welwitschia. Yeah. Now we enter the Permian. The Permian. I like this photo because it identified some of the key shapes that you might find in the Permian, like this kind of large equisetum-looking plant. So, the Permian, you had some interesting immersions. So what happened was you had the immersion of a group called the Ginkgoales. You might know the ginkgo tree, Ginkgo biloba. Ginkgo biloba is actually a relatively new species, but its relatives go back, 270 million years. And here's a fossil of a member of the Ginkgoales. Now, Ginkgoales are gymnosperms, but they're not conifers. Gymnosperms produce naked seeds, and this is different from the cone. But there's also the immersion of cycads. So if you don't know what cycad is, we'll talk about it in a second. And this in the Permian, the ferns, the seed ferns, and the lycophytes started to dominate. They started to dominate the landscape. And so that's why I like this. I like this photo because we have images indicating domination by lycophytes and ferns and things. So when they emerge, that means that's when we found the first fossil. They might not have been very successful in the landscape. They might have been dying. Okay, this is the cycad. Cycads, you might know sago palm. Sago palms are big cycads that exist today. Well, during the Permian, that's when they first evolved, but they didn't really dominate the landscape actually until the Jurassic period. I like this photo because it indicates what it could look like if you're in a landscape dominated by cycads. Cycads make strobili, big looking cone things. And here's a really good photo. This is from Wikimedia. They use it really, they have a good image. Cycads are either male or female, or like positive or negative. And this is a male. This is an old male cone, or people call them cones. It's a strobilus. Two of them of strobili. And then this is the fresh male cone. Yeah, that's right. You get it. And so it looks like a palm tree. Palms don't make these things, I'll tell you that. And these things are poisonous as hell. Okay, in the Permian, you had lots of things that look similar, like these fern trees and cycads. They look so similar. What's the deal? Convergent evolution, baby. They're distantly related species that have the same characteristics. And so the plants themselves have adopted a similar type of shape because it's advantageous for reproduction. If you only have so much energy, use it growing up, growing tall, and getting your seeds out far, your spores out far. I hit the mic. Still working? And so palm trees eventually have the same form. So this is a fern, this is a cycad, not related at all, really. And then palms end up looking like this. Yeah, cycads are pretty toxic. They got neurotoxins, digestive toxins. Keep them away from your pets. Well, they had to evolve during the time of beasts. So now we had another extinction. We're moving through time. Time that's crazy. The Triassic. This is what a Triassic landscape could have looked like. Not much happened during the Triassic. It was pretty uneventful, in my personal opinion. When I had made my first version of this 3 years ago, and I left this section blank, and I skipped it entirely. I spent an hour yesterday trying to make sure that I didn't miss something important. And basically, what happened was the gymnosperms, the plants were just trying to recover from the last extinction. Yeah, no time to mourn. Do we need to go back and cry? Okay, let's go back. The extinction. Lots of plants. For millions of years. For millions of years, the gymnosperms tried to recover. And the spore-producing plants persisted through this time. For those interested in dinosaurs, this is when the first dinosaurs appeared. Next. The Jurassic. The Jurassic period is also called the Age of Cycads. So, this is a modern image. A modern image of a garden. And these is a bunch of different modern cycads, but, you know, it's feasible it could have looked something like this. Yeah. And so, during the Jurassic, seed ferns declined drastically, but we had a domination of gymnosperms. So lots of cycads apparently dominated the landscape, and gymnosperms as a whole took over. Yeah. So the Triassic and Jurassic, I think a little bit unexciting for plant people. But the best one, the most exciting one, is the Cretaceous. This is my personal favorite. This is what a Cretaceous landscape could have looked like. We have cycads, we have palms. Palms emerged during the Cretaceous. We had some cool dinosaurs. Dinosaurs existed, and they ended actually at the Cretaceous. I mean, there's birds and stuff, but the big ones we think of. There's conifers here. So, the Cretaceous period, yes, that is the Zilker dino. The Cretaceous is, I think, the most fascinating because it is the period in which we get the story of what we see today around us. We have a decline in gymnosperms and then a rise in angiosperms. So more flowering plants became well, the first flowering plants existed. There's the group of the nymphales. They began to appear, which is like water lilies. Then palms and grasses appeared at the very end. It wasn't until recently. It wasn't until recently that we realized that grasses existed during the Cretaceous. We thought they came later. And then, yes, that we had a significant engagement of plant and animal interactions. And then we've always had ferns, but one thing to note is that the ferns that we had at, during the Devonian or whatever, they don't, none of them exist anymore. But we have the modern fern families forming during the Cretaceous. So you could go to the Cretaceous period right now and it would be like, okay, this looks normal. But if you went to the Carboniferous, you'd be like, what the hell? So this is what people might consider the first flowering plant. It was aquatic, and these are the fossils. Archaea fructus. If you make flowers, you make fruits. So this is a fossil of that. It is, related to like the water lilies, which are some of the first flowering plants. When did butterflies and moths come to be? A good question, Raymond. So I believe moths came before butterflies, and bees came a little bit later. But we'll talk about that here. So this is when we had the coevolution with insects. So there were beetles. Beetles are so fun. And magnolias had evolved. So these big, kind of strange looking flowers that were actually pollinated by beetles. This particular beetle was discovered in amber, covered in pollen. And so that's pretty decent evidence that they were pollinating. Additionally, the shape of the flower indicates, that it was not necessarily like a bee. I mean, bees will pollinate these today. But at the late Cretaceous, there was the rise in flowers. And then you had the coevolution with insects. So moths came first. Moths and butterflies are the same, basically. Butterflies are a little bit later. But their particular shapes evolved together. Okay, what's next? Oh, yeah. So, I'm in Austin, Texas. Austin, Texas, about 100 million years ago, was on this little piece of the edge of the inland ocean. So through North America, there was an ocean. And if you have limestone, Amberella, well, yeah, we're talking about a lot of them, but not every single thing. But yeah, there's a lot of different key flowering plants. 100 million years ago, Austin was on the edge of a great inland ocean. And there was this cute little beast that lived here called Ornithomimid. And this is a picture of what he might have looked like. Basically like a big kind of ostrich-looking thing with a tail. But its footprints were found in Zilker Botanical Garden, which is where I used to work. And so, yeah, it's a bird mimic, the Ornithomimid, the bird mimic. So they found the footprints there. And these keys are for scale, but this is the footprint of it in the limestone. And so they turned this whole section into a Cretaceous garden. So everything in this garden are living relatives or the exact same genetic material of what was alive in the late Cretaceous. So there's ferns and cycads and conifers and then early flowering plants. And now they put some grasses because we realized that grasses existed in the late Cretaceous. But it is like walking back in time. Now this photo is really cute, but it doesn't do a ton of justice. But I want to show you this because there's palms. So the first palm trees evolved during the Cretaceous. Now there's two types of palm trees. There's fan palms and then the fronds like coconuts. The fans were the first ones. And so they're prominent here, and we have some native to Texas. Major extinction. This is the crazy part. It's called the KP extinction. So K is Cretaceous, and P is the Paleogene, which is next. This extinction wiped out a lot of things. Spooky font. It wiped out a ton of things, but it led to the significant increase in flowering plants. This is what it could have looked like. So I like this one because it included the palms and some more broadleaf things as well. The key point here is that there was a rapid diversification of angiosperms. So a couple years ago, some genomic analysis identified that there was actually multiple copies of the genome in angiosperms. So flowering plants had multiple copies of the genome, and they, because you have multiple copies of a gene, if you have a mutation, maybe due to a catastrophic event like a meteor hitting the Yucatan Peninsula, then you might keep some of the important genes and then make mutants that could potentially increase your survivability and reproductive fitness. And so gymnosperms did not have as many copies of their genome. So if they had a mutation in one of their genes, it could have meant that the plant basically couldn't function. But angiosperms had multiple copies of all their genes. And so that's the leading hypothesis as to why they're able to diversify so well. Because if you have lots of copies, then you're going to have a few just in case for the important stuff, and you can make mistakes with the other ones. And maybe those mistakes are really good, and they actually help you grow and succeed better. And so during the Paleogene, this is when we had the rise of the modern dominant plant mutations. So I think the meteor-induced radiation mutation. I don't know exactly. I'd have to look it up, but I know that the genetic diversity of angiosperms was higher. And so because you have a greater pool of genes, when you're put into an uncomfortable situation, you're more likely to have survival in the population if you have greater genetic diversity. And so that's what happened with angiosperms, people think. Modern plant families. This is our beloved oak. So the key plant families like the beech family, Fagaceae, and the willow family emerged. And now oaks dominate a lot of our landscapes, and they're keynote species. They're very important for our current ecosystems. And this is only 66 to 23 million years ago. Yeah, this is why genetic diversity is vital. That's right. So people who do population genetics identify the importance of having a good pool of diversity. Diversity is really important for everything, really, in all aspects of life, for perspectives to plants and genetics. And we have data. So I love cacti, and so I wanted to include this here. Cacti we don't have any fossils of cacti, but we do know from like genetic analysis that cacti probably appeared at the end of the Paleogene, maybe like 40 million years ago. And one of the potentially first cacti was this one that's currently alive today, called Rhodocactus. Synonymous is called Pereschia. That's the genus. I love these plants. They're tropical cacti, and they're considered the missing link between those spiny things we have today and the plants with big leaves. These have leaves, and at the base of the leaves they have spines. And they are genetically cacti, but they don't look like it. So look up Pereschia. Yeah, Mitchell, exactly. So we don't have fossils of cacti, so sometimes people don't acknowledge that, but they're not old. I'll tell you that. They're relatively new. And Neogene. The Neogene does not particularly excite me, but of key importance for plants is the development of grasses becoming quite prominent. Forests decline and grasses take over because they can endure cold, dry conditions. So in the Neogene, which is basically 23 million years ago to functionally what is almost today, grasslands became pretty prominent as the animals and mammals took over. So mammals arose, and you get, horses and grazing mammals as dominant species. And so I've been only telling you the story about plants, but everything is actually quite interconnected with the climate and the animals around them. So I've been highlighting what's exciting for me, but there's a huge story to tell, and everything's weaved together. And so I told about the insects and And in this particular instance, it's about the mammals taking over. And so there's more seasonality. The poles are becoming more prominent as the land shifts. It's colder and drier, and so grasses become dominant, and they have a particular type of metabolic processes that are advantageous for this. So we've traveled through space and time, and we got to see a lot of interesting things. I hope to whet your appetite, as I like to say, to get you excited about the interesting and exciting evolution of plants. There's a lot of things still left to learn and to figure out, but hopefully you were excited by the rhiniophytes, these strange spore-bearing plants, or the first seed plants over here. And then, of course, most importantly, our beloved Fagaceae. We love the Fagaceae and the oaks. So, there is the whole world of flowering plants that could be a whole separate thing, but simply went through the key evolutionary processes. So, thank you everyone for hanging out. I hope you enjoyed it. We can do questions now, and then I invite you to hang out in stream when we do our video games on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then we also will continue doing these presentations. So in December, it's not a gay joke actually. It's a love of oaks. That's what it is. Yeah. So in December, let me check the date. Your appetite is wet. I'm happy to hear that. Let's check the December 14th. So December 14th. December 14th, we're going to talk about my top 10 favorite houseplants. So that'll be fun. And then on December 14th, we'll vote on the next topic. It could be propagation, it could be soil, it could be expansion on the evolution of flowering plants. You love Bursera phageroides, me too. That's a good one. I love a good smell. I love incense too. So yeah, if you have questions, we can take them now. And we just hang out a little bit. There's so much to see and so much to learn that life is so fun. What is the definition of a land plant? Okay, lame, Kai. I never said the definition of land plant. Yeah, there are potentially non-land plants. So the definitions of plants. Let's go all the way back. At the very beginning, there's different perspectives you can have on what the definition of a plant is. I think at my core, it makes sense cladistically to acknowledge land plants and green algae. So these are all the green things on land that have two membranes in their plastids, only chlorophyll A and B. They produce cellulose. And then they have like a, yeah. And so then here, they have a different reproductive structure. They lack a few different things cellular level. The red algae are pretty different. Red algae have phycobilins, which is a pigment molecule. This group also has 4 membranes in the plastids. So they're kind of different. Yeah, we didn't talk about the evolution of lignin. It is important for the height of trees, that's right. Yeah. So the evolution of lignin is significant in the development of plants getting tall because plants produce cell walls. And within the cell walls, they produce a second cell wall. The second cell wall makes lignin, which is a special polymer that allows for the strength and growth. So yeah, Tiffany, I didn't mention lignin, but it is indeed part of the wood development. So for plants, if you ask Wikipedia, they will identify Archaeplastida and then discuss it in the terms of plants and algae. I think it makes sense cladistically to talk about plants this way but rename it to the proposed like 2005 name, which is Chloroplastida. So this is Embryophyta. I would call this one plants. I'd call this one Chloroplastida and Archaeplastida. And so when you're discussing plants, it's important to identify what if you're including algae or not. So Tiffany, yeah, great point. This all the sounds are going to play. The development of wood is a huge part that occurred in the Devonian period, and so I didn't discuss lignin development, but in some of these transverse sections of fossils, there's the production of lignin. So lots of things to discuss, and you're correct. It is a very fun thing. We're Eternal Ellipsis. We're probably not going to get a fungi presentation. That's not. I don't have a strong expertise in fungi, so it might not be the best. But I mean, plants and soil, we can do that. Favorite cactus? Yeah, my favorite cactus is the Rhodocactus. All the time, play again, please. My favorite is oh no, okay, I shouldn't be doing this. I like to see all the things again though. Yeah, I like this one. The Rhodocactus is the current accepted genus name. This is now, I mean, most people call it Parischia, but it's my favorite cactus. Resources, if you want to learn more. Yeah, so Clock Owl, the University of California, Berkeley, the University Museum of Paleontology has a really good like online plant paleobotany section. So if you just type UC Berkeley paleobotany, you'll find the website. Yeah, so I think that is one of my favorite resources, as it is written for someone who's a student learning, and it doesn't throw tons of jargon at you, and it explains everything really well. Some of the interface is a little bit old, but it's not bad. Yeah, the Parischia are good for great for grafting. Yeah. So yeah, as I noted, there's a ton of things to discuss and mention. I just give you my distilled version and the things that are fun. The domestication of wild cabbage. So Salty Boy, I have a presentation on that. Yeah, I have a presentation, Salty Boy, on horticultural crop improvement is the formal title, but I called it breeding and seeding. And I gave it at the garden, actually, and everyone was fine with that title. I mean, no one knew, I guess. But yeah. So December 14th, we'll vote on the next one. That'll be the January one, maybe, if you vote. So anyway, yeah, Tiffany, thanks for your questions. Thanks for hanging out. And yeah, dinosaurs could have eaten grasses. So a very fun time. Well. That is a rubber tree. Over there, yeah. Ficus elasticum. At any rate, thank you so much. We will see you around, maybe on Monday, maybe next month. So, until next time, I'll say thank you and farewell. Take care and hope you have a good weekend. It's just begun for me, you know. This is a good start to the weekend. All right, well, thank you, everyone. Thanks, Lampfrost and Biological Exuberance and Raymond and Melissa and Mitchell and Salty Boy and Marcus and Sage of Senpai and Chris Croft and Mitchell and Shawnee Boy and Brian and Lame Kai. Thank you, Zurich. All right, friends. Well, take care and be nice to each other. See you around.